Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Will Weatherford. I am a state legislator from the Tampa area, and I'm honored to be here today. I would like to give the blessing here before we start lunch, so if you would, please bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you, Lord, and we are so humbled to be in your presence. We thank you for the tremendous dialogue that has taken place here over the past few days. And Lord, we ask that you continue to work on us as we leave here at the end of this week and go back to our respective states and our countries, that we continue to keep the student first in our mind, Lord, and the children that are across this country that need education to create a better life for themselves. We are so grateful for the leadership and for the wisdom of the people in this room, Lord. We are so thankful for the tremendous blessings that we have living in this country. We are thankful for our military, Lord, and the protection they provide us. We live in the greatest nation in the history of the world, and we are thanking you that they are based upon the principles of your book. We ask all these things in your very precious name. Amen.
Good afternoon. Now that you all are comfortably ensconced and enjoying your lunch, we'll see if we can't interfere with your tableside conversations. It's the way these things work. I'm Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Delighted to be chairing this lunch and plenary session this afternoon. It's hard to find three more interesting, provocative thinkers in the world of education today. So we'll see if I can't try to stay out of their way as much as possible and give you a chance to hear some of the folks who are really thinking not in terms of how do we get this right in 2009 or 2010, but how do we start to set this up for 2020. I just want to take a couple minutes to set the issue up before I turn it over to the panelists and before I introduce them. First thing I think to keep in mind when we talk about challenges of school reform, and particularly the role of technology, is if we think back, most of our guiding assumptions for how we tackle teaching and learning today are at least 2,500 years old. There's value in abiding by tradition and respecting what has worked in the past, but it's also useful to understand when what was done in the past was done because they had to do it that way. If you were a student of Socrates or Plato 2,500 years ago, you had to sit at their feet and engage in Socratic dialogue because there was no other way they were going to teach you anything. If you were more than 200 feet away, all they could do was shout dimly at you. There were no books. There were certainly no Blackberries. There was no web. They did it that way because they had to do it that way. 600 years ago, a guy named Gutenberg figured out how to build something called the printing press. Once you actually had a printing press and books could be available in more than a tedious handcrafted fashion, it started to change the way that education could be pursued. It meant that you didn't have to be in dialogue with your instructor to learn from them. They could write things down, or other experts who didn't live in your community could write things down, and they could send you off to a place that we decided to call the library. And you could read there, and then come back and ask questions. Well, what it would seem obvious today is that we have a new set of tools at our disposal. You have the ability today to not just learn from the smartest person who lives in your neighborhood, and not just live from a professional educator who happens to live in your community and who you can be bused to in less than 45 minutes, but you have the opportunity to sit down in the comfort of your own home, hit an on button on your laptop, and listen to the world's leading authority of molecular biology give a lecture in Paris. Yet, almost all of our guiding assumptions tend to be informed by the notion that we want to figure out how to get more certified teachers engaging in the same activities with the smallest number of children in the same buildings that we have been trying to renovate and refurbish since 1923. This is one strategy. Not sure it's the optimal strategy. And what we're going to hear about today is from three folks who actually not only have flagged the inanity of trying to deliver 21st century education through 19th century models and approaches, much less first century models and approaches, but who have offered some specific thoughts and guidance and intuitions as to how we can start to walk into the 21st century. First up is going to be Clay Christensen. Dr. Christensen is, of course, a professor at Harvard Business School, a profound thinker in the area of innovation and entrepreneurship. His totemic works include The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution. His book, which many of you, I think, have either read or have heard that you need to read, and I always get, it's class disrupted, right? Disrupting class. Good Lord. Sorry, Clay. These are the reasons that they don't have me tenured at real universities. Long-term memory is considered valuable there. So Clay's going to take about 20 minutes to share with you some of the key insights and intuitions from that volume. Second up is John Chubb with Edison Schools, former professor at Stanford University. John is co-author with Stanford's Terry Moe of the new volume, Liberating Learning. And John is particularly going to talk about some of the political challenges that emerge when we start to think about leveraging technology and pursuing the possibilities of technology-aided change. And speaking third is going to be Ohio State Representative Bill Coley, through his efforts to develop Ohio's cutting-edge distance learning clearinghouse and champion educational choice. Bill is a practitioner who is one of those folks on the ground who is actually putting excellence into action for students in the Buckeye State. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Clay to get us started.
Thank you, Rick. I'm grateful that you introduced me as somebody who does thinking and writing, which almost makes me unworthy to stand in front of you because you're the ones that are doing the doing. And that is far more difficult than thinking and writing. And I just honor you for the way you have given of yourselves to solve these problems. My job is just, I think and write about innovation, not specific to any industry. But a number of years ago, some folks who had been instrumental in initiating the chartered school movement came and said, you know, the struggles of our schools to improve really at their core are problems of managing innovation. So maybe instead of just studying schools to reach conclusions about schools, what if you just stood to the side of the industry and examined school improvement efforts through the lenses of your work on innovation? Maybe you'd be able to see stuff that others haven't been able to see. So I naively signed up, and it took me about 10 years with my colleague Michael Horn and Curtis Johnson to come up with the book that we weren't ashamed of publishing. And there sure are a lot of things that we have learned subsequent to that. But I'd like to just review with you three concepts from our research on innovation that I think are somewhat salient to the challenges of improving our schools. The first one relates to the challenge we have of motivating our students. And you see the problems of motivation manifest in dropout rates and absenteeism, or just the disinterested and defiant looks on the faces of our students in suburban schools. There's a model from our research that I think has helped us understand why motivation is a problem. And every time an innovator develops a product, she's got to target it at a segment of the market, because no products can serve all needs for everyone. Some people segment their markets by product category. So the auto industry, for example, believes that their market is structured by subcompacts, compacts, full-size, mid-size, SUVs, minivans, and so on. And when they develop a new product, they target it to fit in one of those segments, and they believe that it competes against other products in that segment. Other companies will segment their markets by customer characteristics. So you have small, medium, large enterprises, low income, middle income, high income households, 18 to 34-year-old males with and without children. There are a jillion ways to slice the world by demographic characteristics. And if you're in your company looking out on the market, that indeed is the way it appears to be structured. And when you collect data on the market, the data comes arrayed by product category, customer category, and that kind of reinforces your sense that that's how the world is structured. The problem that creates for innovators, however, is that's not what the world feels like if you're the customer in the market. If you're the customer, stuff just happens to you. All day long, jobs arise in your life that you've got to get done. And it's very useful to frame that customers hire products and services to get jobs done for themselves. And I wanted to just illustrate this with a silly example. One of the big fast food restaurant chains was trying to increase the sales of their milkshakes. And they thought that their market was structured by product category. You went in, here's the menu board, you got sandwiches, desserts, milkshake is a line item in the dessert menu. They could tell you exactly how many Burger King, Wendy's, McDonald's sold. But they also, in a very sophisticated way, had defined demographic profiles of the kinds of people that had a proclivity to buy each of the items on the menu. So they had a profile of the quintessential milkshake consumer. They'd invite people in, ask them, how could we improve our milkshakes so you'll buy more of them? They'd get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake, and it would have no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So one of our colleagues went in with a different question on his mind. That was, I wonder what job people are hiring these milkshakes to do. So he stood in a restaurant for 18 hours, took very careful data. When did they buy it? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? And it turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold in the very early morning. It was the only thing they bought. They were always alone, and they always got in the car and drove off. So the next day, he decided to figure out what job they were hiring the milkshake to do. He came and stood outside the restaurant and confronted these folks as they were leaving, milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, he essentially asked, excuse me, please, but I got to understand something. What job were you trying to do that caused you to come here to hire that milkshake? And as they would struggle to answer, he'd help them by asking, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same thing done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And it turned out that they all had the same job to do. And that is, they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand, and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they also wanted something that would just stay there for the morning. Boy, good question. What do I hire when I have this job to do? You know, I never thought about it, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job, but take my word for it, never hired bananas. They're gone fast. You're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I hired donuts a lot, but they get my fingers sticky. They crumb all over my clothes. They're gone too fast. I hire bagels occasionally, but geez, they're dry and tasteless. So then I have to spread cream cheese and jam on them and drive with my knees, and then if the phone rings... I remember I hired Snickers bars once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. But let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? All I know is it stays in my stomach all morning and it fits right in my cup holder. And it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which are not Burger King milkshakes, but rather bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. And then it turned out in the afternoon and evening, it was hired for a very different job, primarily by fathers who try to placate their children. And that's a very different story. Well, then they invite the customer to come in and say, Clay, so tell us how we could improve the product so you'll buy more of them. What am I going to tell them? Because I hire it for two fundamentally different jobs, and then they average my response with all of the other 45 to 65-year-old male slobs with children, and they come up with a one-size-fits-none product that doesn't do well any of the jobs that it's being hired to do. But I hope you can see how if you understand the job, then how to improve the product becomes very clear. So for the morning product, how would you improve it? Well, you'd make it more viscous to take even longer to suck it up. You'd stir tiny chunks of fruit in it, but not to make it healthy because they don't hire it to become healthy, but rather just to add some interest to the morning routine, and at random they'll suck up a piece of fruit. And then you'd move the dispensing machine from behind the counter to the front of the counter and give them a prepaid swipe card so they could just dash in, gas up, and go and never get caught behind a line. And then to placate your children's job would have to be a very different product. Well, as we've learned about this, if you develop a product that helps customers do a job that they've been trying to do, it's almost in every instance, it's what you call a killer app. People will change their behavior dramatically. They'll learn how to compute because it makes it easier for them than just handwriting a letter. So they'll change their behavior dramatically if you make a product that'll help them do better a job that they're trying to do. But if you help them do a job that they're not trying to do, it's just like an uphill death march through knee-deep mud. So people will change behavior. They don't change jobs very well. So as we've studied this, what we decided is that education actually isn't a job that students are trying to do. Education is something that they could hire to do the job. But the basic job would be described as, I need to feel successful and important. And students have that job to be done every day. And they could hire schools to get that job done. They could hire gang membership to get that job done. They could drop out of school, buy a car, cruise around the neighborhood to feel important and successful. Or they could hire basketball to do the job. But the schools compete against very different things to get this job done. And when you look at it through that lens, most of what exists in our schools is not designed to help most students feel successful. And when we see a student perform well in school, we'll say, she's motivated. And when we'll see the vast majority of other students not doing as well in school, we'll say, well, the reason is they're just not motivated. Our bet is that they're all equally motivated to feel successful. It's just a minority of them can feel success when they hire school. And the rest of them, when they hire school, they don't feel successful. In fact, there's much of the way school is structured that's designed to help them feel like failures. And we only administer tests every 2 to 3 weeks. We then delay the feedback for another week. And then just by the very nature of the way we grade, we help a few feel successful, but most don't. And so then we wonder, why are we struggling with these problems of motivation? And I think a core reason might be that we're just kind of improving the milkshake on dimensions of performance that are irrelevant to the job that most of our students are trying to get done. Now, when we see companies that are improving or focusing a product around a job to be done, it helps them understand how to integrate their activities so that you provide all of the experiences required to get the job done well. Now, for example, IKEA. You ever notice that nobody's been able to copy IKEA? They've been rolling out across America for 40 years. And our sense is that every other furniture company defines its business by product category, cheap furniture, colonial furniture, whatever. But IKEA is organized around a job to be done, which job arose in my son's life a month ago when he called and said, "Dad, I got to furnish the apartment tomorrow." And IKEA has an integrated system that's designed to get that job done, which is, I've got to furnish this place right now. So it helps you integrate in the right way. You bring the dispensing machine in front of the counter, give them a payment system that's right there so they can dash in and gas up and go. And so if we design our schools in the right way to get the job done, which is I need to feel successful, we integrate in a very different way than we do if we simply think that the delivery of the content is the job that our schools need to help our students do. And what we really need to do is integrate opportunities to feel successful every day and every hour with the delivery of content. And so often in our schools, we actually separate opportunities to feel successful from the delivery of content. We call those often extracurricular activities. One of the best selling points to me of delivering content online through computers is that you can actually build into the learning experience opportunities to feel successful many times every day. Whereas the design of a classroom where we're teaching a monolithic group of students, all of whom ought to be learning at different paces, when we just do it in a traditional way, it is very hard to build success into the hour-by-hour process of learning. So that's just one thing that I wanted to suggest to you that we have begun to see as we've studied our schools through the lenses of research. And that is that we think all students are motivated to feel successful. And that's the fundamental job. And the schools haven't been designed to be hired for that job with much satisfaction. The second thing that we've observed, which is not news to the rest of you, that because every student learns differently, it really mandates the ability to customize the way we deliver content to different styles of learning, different types of intelligence, different paces of learning. And one of the marvelous things about technology is that while it is very difficult for a teacher standing in front of an array of students, each of whom learns differently, it's almost impossible for the teacher to customize the way she teaches to the needs of each student. Technology enables this kind of customization in a very readily, a simple way. And that's the second reason why, and it intersects with the first one of how do we motivate our students to do better. One of the reasons why computers so far have largely failed to influence the quality with which we help our students learn is that the money has been misspent. Now, almost always, established companies, when they see a new technology, try to cram that new technology into head-on competition against the old technology in the belief that there's no use for it until the new outperforms the old. And in reality, the way new technology always takes root in the marketplace is it competes against non-consumption at the beginning. In other words, it gets deployed in an opportunity where the alternative is nothing, and therefore, even though the new technology is fairly immature, it gets snapped up because it is infinitely better than nothing. Now, for those of you who have a bit of gray hair, if you go back to the history of when the transistor as a new technology displaced the vacuum tube, which was the old technology, all of the vacuum tube companies like RCA and Zenith and Westinghouse and General Electric took the transistor technology and tried to make big floor-standing televisions with it. And that was a very difficult thing in the 1950s and 60s to accomplish with this nascent technology that was called solid-state electronics. Sony deployed the transistor against non-consumption. They made those cheap little pocket radios, do you remember that? And they sold it to the low end of humanity, people we called teenagers. And the teenagers were delighted to have a radio that wasn't very good because it was infinitely better than their other option, which is no radio at all. And then in that environment, it got better and better and better and better, and one by one drew customers out of the vacuum tube world into that world. And ultimately, the vacuum tube technology was overturned, but not because it was attacked directly, but rather the method of attack of the new technology was to deploy it in simple applications. Then it improved, and then it drew the customers out. You see the same mistake being made now in solar energy. We spend billions of dollars developing solar cells, and then we try to pit solar cells into head-on competition against power over the grid. And that's a very difficult technological hurdle to overcome. And we just have to subsidize the gazoo out of it. But solar energy has been 7 years away from cost competitiveness with power over the grid for 45 years. And where you see solar energy taking root is amongst non-consumers of electricity, the 2 billion people in Asia and Africa who don't have power over the grid. Solar energy is better than nothing. They're delighted with a fairly limited product, and in that context, it gets better and better and better, and then draws applications into it. And so my bet is that whether solar energy ever becomes viable in America, the solutions will not come from head-on attacks against the grid, but rather deploying it in simple applications, and then it will improve. Well, the mistake that we've made in deploying computers in our schools is we stick them right in the classroom, right next to the teacher, and they have only been deployed to support and sustain the traditional model of helping our students learn. And where you see online learning taking root, true to form, is not in the classroom where the teacher is, but rather competing against non-consumption in credit recovery programs, small schools that don't have the scale for AP courses, homeschooling. And online learning is a booming business. It just has been misapplied with the first $60 billion that we have spent on the technology. Now let me just say one last thing. We have found in our studies that when a company starts out, it has no organization structure, it has a product. But then as the company tries to develop the next generation and the next generation products, they begin to develop organizational departments in their engineering and marketing that have responsibility for each of the components of the product. And so the causality is the structure of the organization's architecture is a reflection of the product's architecture. Well, after a few years, if you ask the organization to then develop the next product, the causality works in reverse. And the product that the organization can develop tends to be the mirror image of the organization's architecture. In fact, if you're savvy about this, you can unscrew the cover off of a product and sketch out the org chart just by looking at the structure of the product. So our schools have that architecture, the organizational architecture. You have foreign language departments, mathematics departments, science departments, and so on, which is a reflection of the curriculum as it had begun to be taught years and years ago. So when we ask that organizational architecture to design the next generation of learning experiences for our students, all they can do is replicate the architecture of the organization. And the only way to solve that problem is to lift people out of their departments and pull them up, stick them over here, and put them on what we call a heavyweight team. And the assignment is, you're not there representing the interest of your department. We put you here to bring your expertise, but your assignment over here is to rethink the basic architecture of the product. So in the hybrid vehicle world, when you drive the original Honda hybrid vehicle, no offense to those of you who might own one, it's a clunky car. And that's because they designed it from within the organization that exists to do their internal combustion engine cars. But Toyota pulled folks out of the departments, stuck them in a very different part of Japan, and said, who knows what a hybrid vehicle should look like or how it should function, but you guys figure it out. And once they got freed from the scope of the departments that they worked in, they designed it just an elegant car that the Prism just so far outperforms anything else. But the root is that they created a different organizational structure that wasn't bound by the old architecture. And so another core reason why technology hasn't yet been deployed in a way that can really change the way our students learn is we try to address these problems from within the structure of the current schools. One of the rationales behind chartered schools, as an example, is they can be heavyweight teams. You take them out of the structure that had confined the way they think. Most of the chartered schools haven't changed the architecture of schools, but a few have. But whenever we have these kinds of architectural changes in the curriculum that we envision, it requires a concomitant restructuring of the team so that we can innovate in a way that is consistent with the product that needs to be made. Well, those are just three examples of insights that we've begun to glean as we've examined schools through the lenses of our work on innovation, and I hope some of these thoughts will be useful to you. Thank you again for letting me join you.
Thank you, Clay. Next up is Dr. John Chubb, Chief Development Officer and Senior Executive Vice President of Edison Learning.
Thank you. So Clay has painted this picture of the exciting, motivating, appealing ways in which technology can make life better for kids and better for our schools. The question is, and this is the big question, is this going to happen? Innovation has come to the private sector, to companies that compete in the marketplace over and over and over again, and it has happened the way that Clay has described, by coming in around the edges, competing with non-consumption. But the government is a different animal. The government is not in the marketplace. It's subject to political pressure, and education, being a political institution, has been especially slow to change. So the question is it going to change? When is it going to change? How long is it going to take? Well, that's the subject that we took up in liberating learning. Next Tuesday, the State Board of Education in the state of Louisiana has a big decision to make. Now, Louisiana has been one of the most innovative education systems over the last several years under the leadership of Paul Pastorak and Paul Vallis and Governor Jindal. They recognize that performance in Louisiana is unacceptably low by any standards, and they've been willing to break China and make very innovative moves to try to improve the schools in Louisiana, one of the most vigorous systems of competition and choice anywhere in the country, and a very tough accountability system that's prepared to close down poor-performing schools. So what's the big decision next Tuesday? Well, next Tuesday, the Board of Education in Louisiana is faced with the application from community leaders throughout Louisiana for the creation of the state of Louisiana's 3 first online charter schools. These schools will provide education over the internet to kids in their homes, and the schools will be organized as charter schools. The schools, as I said, are being supervised by leading citizens of Louisiana, and they're being run by major companies with strong track records of offering online education throughout America. Yesterday, the State Superintendents Association for the state of Louisiana came out with a formal statement of opposition to the charter schools. They said that this is unproven, that how can we put our children at risk and take them out of the schools that they're in and subject them to this unproven form of education online. And in addition, how can we take the taxpayers' local dollars and give them over to charter schools and to private companies to educate our kids. Well, there's a lot of controversy around this, and nobody knows what's going to happen on Tuesday, but there's actually some speculation that the board may decide to punt on the issue and delay the implementation of online education. That would be a tragedy, but I bring this example up not to say anything about Louisiana except to be very complimentary of its efforts to innovate, but rather to use Louisiana as a microcosm of what's happening around the country. Online education, just to be really clear, and technology in general in schools is being opposed not for educational reasons, not because of concerns about the kids, but because of concerns about adults. And that's what this battle is all about. In Louisiana and every state around the nation, there are battles that take place every day between the forces of the status quo and the interests of the adults in the status quo and the opportunities to innovate using technology. Now, those are very strong words, but we really need to understand the politics. Technology has enormous potential to help kids. As Clay described, it makes it possible for kids to see material and to be instructed with multimedia that can't be duplicated in a classroom. It provides the opportunity for kids to move at their own pace and not in lockstep. It provides the opportunity for teachers to reach to kids over the internet and tutor them one-on-one, or for great teachers to reach large groups of kids that would otherwise not be possible. It's especially powerful, that is technology, in bringing opportunities into inner cities and rural areas and places where the traditional model simply has no chance of bringing these kinds of opportunities to kids. And then mostly we've discussed online education and direct instruction, but technology also is about an information revolution. And the information that technology can bring even to traditional schools about the performance of kids in real time. Have they learned this week? If they haven't learned this week, what are we going to do about it? Or information about teachers. Who is effective? Who is ineffective? What do we need to do to change their performance? Technology has the potential to revolutionize education for kids and through information systems to revolutionize the way schools work. But all of these powerful opportunities are extremely threatening to the status quo as we know it today. If kids learn more through technology, they will learn less through teachers. More technology does mean, in time, fewer teachers. That is a threatening notion. If teachers are not just teaching in regular classrooms, but are teaching online, teaching from their homes, teaching part-time, teaching in the evening, teaching everywhere, anywhere, they're no longer the same kind of industry available for organizing that they are today. That is threatening. If schools are mixtures of traditional classes and kids learning in open spaces online, the schools also are threatened. So for all of these reasons, the groups that represent the status quo are resisting a technology. So some of the things that you see when you look at this from a scientific standpoint, you see that only 25 states in the nation have online schools. If you take a look at the penetration of education technology in schools state by state, what you find is the stronger the unions in the state, the less the penetration of technology. Only 20 states even allow their state data systems to identify the teachers who taught the kids. Only 20 out of 50. I look down here at my friend Joel Klein, who works in the state of New York, in New York City, and doing an amazing job against a lot of odds. But the odds include prohibitions. There's very little online learning in New York State. And he is prohibited by the state legislature from using information on teacher performance in teacher evaluations. So the opposition is there, and what this means for our kids is that they're getting access to technology slower, much slower than they should. As Clay said, one of the largest groups having access to technology and online education today are kids who have dropped out or failed classes. You're much more likely to use technology in schools today if you're failing than if you're average. That makes no sense whatsoever, but that is the way it's working. Now, this is not a bad news story. In fact, it's a good news story. What is going to happen in the future? Well, technology, and this is the fundamental thing to understand, technology is not another reform. Technology doesn't require legislative action to go forward. Technology is advancing through society, through other industries. It is advancing whether education policymakers like it or not. It is coming in, seeping in around the edges. It's advancing. It cannot be stopped, and it won't be stopped. And as it seeps in, it changes the politics. Slowly but surely, more kids will learn with technology, and teachers will play different roles. There'll be fewer teachers. What that does is it weakens the power of the organizations that support the status quo. It happens in every other industry. It will happen in education. As more kids learn online, the constituencies of politics change. The more kids who are learning online, the more kids are using technology, the more parents there are who experience that and advocate for the kids. There is a reason that President Obama and Secretary Duncan are now standing up for charter schools. And it's not because the unions, their other supporters, have converted. It's because they have now 1.5 million constituents in the inner cities who benefit from charter schools and are now driving the politics in a different direction. And so, too, will it be with technology. The forces of the opposition will be weakened by it, new constituents will be created, and will move forward. So the future is inevitably one that is going to benefit from technology. I want to emphasize here that, and I say this is very important, when I talk about online learning proliferating, people will often say, so you've got this vision of kids staying home with their parents and all learning by themselves, in their pajamas or something? No. There are kids and families that want to have that kind of education environment. But for most kids, schooling will become a hybrid environment. They will spend some of their time in the direct care and direct instruction with teachers, but as they get older, they will do more and more of their work via computers, using technology, using online instruction, teachers online, and schools will be genuine hybrids. And in a hybrid environment, there will be fewer teachers indeed, but those teachers will be paid more because they will be more productive. We will attract better people into education, and the overall quality of the institution will improve. The only question is, how long will it take? And that's a question that we tend to answer optimistically because the forces are that strong. But I also want to emphasize in a crowd today where there are many policymakers that there are many things that policymakers can do to accelerate the movement. And I want to emphasize just one thing in this regard. The system does respond to competition. Most of the kids in the public education currently it's an institution. It can change. It will change. But it changes most rapidly in response to competitive pressures. And online education is a competitive pressure that should be reinforced. And so policymakers, if you are in a state that prohibits online education through the charter sector, well, take a look at that. Don't just lift your charter cap on brick and mortar. Lift your prohibitions on online charter schools. And then while you're at it, look at some of the details. Don't require that the kids be in online, quote, classes of 25. That is stupid, right? Don't require that California, that you can only be in an online school that serves kids in contiguous counties to where the school is located. Hey, the internet can go around the globe. It can certainly cross a county border, right? And finally, teachers. Every state in the union with online schools requires that the teachers who are working online be certified in that state. This is a global system, Let's let the great teacher in California help the kid in Nevada, But these are all the kinds of silly restrictions that are being put in the laws to try to hold technology back. This won't last. It is all changing, and that is very good news. And I think in no time at all, We will be educating our kids for the 21st century in schools that actually look like the 21st century. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next up is Ohio Representative Bill Coley.
No pressure here. I mean, following these two guys, I mean, talk about feeling like a schmo. I mean, you know, you just heard just some of what the future is going to look like in education. To give you a good analogy, I want you to pretend we're all sitting in this room. It's 1904, and we're talking about transportation, and Clayton just talked about these guys, the Wright brothers, who flew a plane last December. That's the magnitude of what we're talking about here. But how do we get this concept of education moving in your state? As John described, there's a lot of forces that have a vested interest in the status quo. What we did in Ohio is we created a clearinghouse. And what the clearinghouse is a system by which each school and school district can register courses into the clearinghouse online educational catalog. And then each school system throughout the state can decide which courses from the online catalog it's going to allow its students to take. And then the clearinghouse takes care of moving the money from the student school to the teacher's school. Very simple concept. But you guys out there in education, you guys are responsible for coming up with the great ideas, coming up with the innovation, using technology. Our job as legislators is to just set the ground rules and set the environment in place where you guys can succeed. Now, the good news about this process, and we're just getting started in Ohio, and I want to thank my good friend Clayton for that. You know, there was as you might guess, in some states, there's a little bit of political ideological difference here. And while the Republicans in the state embraced this idea of the clearinghouse, there was an initial resistance across the aisle. But after, and the governor, to his credit, the governor placed the responsibility for this program with the Board of Regents, and the chancellor of the Board of Regents, Eric Fingerhut, happened to read Clayton's book. After you read this, he's calling me. He goes, Bill, we got to get this thing moving. And this has been great. And the good news, once this is in place in your state, you administrators out there, guess what? Your course offerings just increased exponentially. You still get to decide what classes the students take. So if you are knee-deep in government teachers in your school district, you don't have to allow students to take the online courses in government. But if you're short in foreign language and you want kids to be able to take Mandarin Chinese or Farsi, suddenly they can take Mandarin or Chinese from Farsi from a teacher in another corner of the state. You also get to decide as administrators what classes you add from your school catalog, what classes you're going to add to the clearinghouse. And then, as responsibility is with us all, you have to decide what the revenue split from the students, the money that comes in, how are you going to split that with the teachers? Because you're asking them to do more, and they're willing to do more. But you're going to have to decide that revenue split, and you're going to have to work that out in contract negotiations. Now, parents, teachers, guess what? Good news is your course offerings just increased exponentially. For the first time, many of you are going to have access to advanced placement classes for your students, and your kids are going to be graduating high school with college credit. You may have special needs students that have never had course offerings for their special needs kids in the district available to them that are going to be available for the first time. And a lot of the students out there, you know, the traditional classroom works best for 15 to 40% of the kids. What if you're in the 15 to 40% it doesn't work for? I got the numbers wrong, but if it doesn't work, and I was a math major, can you believe that? But what if it doesn't work best for you, and you're in that 15 to 40% that the traditional class doesn't work best for? You feel peer pressure. You're an attractive young girl, and you don't want to be the smart girl in the class because none of the boys will like you, and if you're smart in class, you won't be able to have a date in for prom this coming up. Or you're a jock and you're the star of the football team and you don't want to be the smart guy in the class, so you feel peer pressure to not excel. The online environment gives you a chance to excel, and no one else knows. Just you and your teacher. Now, you legislators out there, the good news is the course offerings to your students and constituents just increased exponentially. The other good news is, you know that lawsuit that was going to be filed that said your state school funding system was unconstitutional because kids in this corner of the state didn't have access to the best teachers that this corner of the state had? Now they got access to them. You teachers out there, your ability to reach students just increased exponentially. You know, I've always said teachers should be paid like rock stars. But how much could I pay U2 and Bono to perform 5 or 6 shows a day in front of 25 people? Not a whole lot. But now you have access to every kid in the state. And guess what? I view teachers a lot like doctors. You guys are coming up with a prescription, an educational prescription for each student, and now these tools will allow you to tailor that prescription for that exact student. A student who needs specialty work in mathematics but doesn't really get it when I talk in an engineering form, but really clicks when I talk in a business model or I talk in a construction model, now you'll be able to prescribe that just that way. So with this clearinghouse, if enacted in Alaska, kids in Pilot Point, Alaska would be able to take Mandarin Chinese from a teacher in Anchorage. Special need kids in Cow Springs, Arizona would be able to take special needs mathematics from a teacher in Arlington. Students in Evansville, Indiana would be able to take calculus from a teacher in Andrews. Students in St. Simons, Georgia would be able to take advanced placement government and get college credit from a student who's teaching them from the city of Athens. In Paint Rock, Texas, kids would be able to take world history from a teacher in Austin. In Brainerd, Minnesota, teachers would be able to educate kids located there from their home in Angle Inlet, Minnesota. And kids in Key West, Florida would be able to take advanced placement literature from a teacher in Avon Park and get college credit good at any college in the state of Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the future of education. You know, just as the airplane allowed our transportation system to break the bonds that Earth held and soar to the moon and beyond, these tools will allow our education system to break the bonds that bricks and mortar once placed upon our education system, and it would allow our education system to soar to even greater heights. Thanks for being here.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you so much, Bill. We've got a few minutes for questions. We're going to have microphones coming around. While we get to you, let me just throw out 1 or 2 questions. I'm going to ask panelists, if y'all, I know each of you's got books worth of material to say on this topic, but if we can try to stay brief in responses, and I'm going to ask particularly that questions actually be questions. If we're 10 or 15 seconds in and I can't spot a question anywhere down the road, we're going to give somebody else a chance. Just a couple quick questions for clarification purposes. Clay, when you talk about students being successful, some skeptics might say, well, geez, isn't this just self-esteem that you're talking about? And isn't that different from schools really equipping students to master content and skills?
Well, you might describe feeling successful as the mechanism by which self-esteem is enhanced, which is a very important motivator for all of us. If we're not motivated to go into situations where our self-esteem is degraded. And so we just need to integrate into the system mechanisms for doing that. And so much of the way we're organized is designed to do just the opposite.
Terrific. John, Jeff Bezos starts Amazon in the Seattle area. And there was no expectation that he would win state-by-state votes to be able to deliver Amazon in New York or Idaho. People just started buying books online from him. Given the political configuration in which this delivery is to take place, are there any particular strategies, particularly for legislators who are supportive of what you're talking about, to import learnings on how to promote this from other sectors?
Well, a couple of things. One, there's a certain amount of inevitability to all of this because online learning is going to be available in the K-12 space, is already available in the K-12 space for parents to be able to consume it. And as parents consume, reaching into their own pocket to acquire education support for their kids, tutoring or whatever, it just becomes increasingly pervasive, and that helps change the politics and make the most reactionary states sort of see the naturalness of this. So some of this is inevitable. But the second thing is, as I said in my remarks, I think it's important simply to allow the mechanism of charter schools to allow the market really to determine whether there's demand for this in a state or not. The states can compete with that, but you need some system, some mechanism outside of the traditional system to provide some competitive pressure, and charters do that.
And Bill, you pointed out the problems with getting quality teachers to all the kids we want. Well, we've got 3.4 million teachers in the U.S. It's more than 10% of the college-educated workforce. It's hard to see how do we get from here to there in terms of getting 3.4 million good teachers. Part of what you're talking about is specialization, the ability of teachers to do different work and to do it differently. What does this mean for legislators in terms of state regs on FTEs or compensation? What do we need to start thinking about?
I think for legislators, it makes the job a lot easier because the mold is shattered at that point. As soon as you start injecting compensation and technology into the format, all of a sudden the standard negotiations don't become, we only want 25.4 kids per student, and we want all of a sudden teachers are talking, we need more bandwidth, and why can't we have more flexibility to sell this class, or what does it take to get this class to qualify for advanced placement credit? And the mold is just shattered. And I just really think it makes our job as legislators a lot easier.
Terrific. Right here, ma'am.
Hi, Brent Nelson, Furman University, and Republican candidate for state superintendent in South Carolina. And I just wanted to know if the panelists are seeing some of the things I'm seeing in my state, if you're seeing them across the country. I've seen a blurring of the lines between some of the traditional types of schools, primarily public, private, and home schools. I think all of us know that there are private school children that take courses at, say, the local technical college and places like that. But it was really underlined to me a few days ago when I talked to one of the traditional homeschool moms who told me that this year she hired 30 teachers in a homeschool co-op that meets in a church down the street. And I don't know, 30 teachers sounds like a private school to me, but they still call themselves a homeschool and they only meet twice a week. But I'm just wondering if those kinds of lines are blurring and what that really means for the kind of neat categories that we've talked about for many years, but maybe can't talk about now.
Terrific.
Well, I think the cool thing about it is, yes, it's blurred. No longer do you have to be just a traditional bricks and mortar student. You can take some classes in that environment. Some classes you're going to take online. And it just presents a wealth of opportunity for each student, and the parents can help set that curriculum for each child.
Yes, sir.
I'm John Paget from Key West, Florida. And since Key West was in one of your examples, Bill, I have to ask, why were all of your examples constrained to state boundary lines?
Well, our former speaker, John Husted, used to say, you got to deal in reality, not in the land of nymphs and fairies. And right now, we have to deal with the reality. I think somewhere down the road, we would all agree that those boundary lines will break down. But right now, given that this education model is created state by state, you have those limitations. Now, of course, I will say this. I believe right now we have some very high-quality educators that are sleeping and waking up each morning in the state of Ohio that are educating kids in Florida. But they're licensed in Florida. They're teaching kids in Florida, although the teacher may reside in Florida or in Ohio right now. So those boundary lines are blurring, but I don't think they're ready to break down just yet.
Terrific. Next question. Yes, sir.
John really led right into it. And Clay and John, assuming you didn't have Rich Crandall from Arizona, the chair of the House Education Committee, we literally do not have the legislative obstacles or the union obstacles right now in Arizona. We just passed legislation opening up all virtual learning. How would you take that Ohio model literally to the next step? John or Clay.
So in the lands of nymphs and fairies.
I think that online can realize the greatest potential if the barriers are really gone. So if it's possible to provide online education where teachers can literally reside anywhere in the United States or internationally, assuming they meet certain basic requirements, where it's possible to bring in any kind of coursework wherever it happens to be created. Right now, there are restrictions on actual curriculum having to satisfy certain requirements. I mean, my view is test the kids. If the kids can perform, then you have the right accountability. But don't try to regulate all the inputs. Just measure the outputs. And the more open the state is to having any kind of online education, the more businesses and others are going to want to invest in providing it there.
Clay?
One of the things we've seen is that customers are very willing to pay for products that get jobs done that are important to them. So Kazaa and Napster kind of made music available for free, and it was clunky and not very good. And then when Apple came in with its iPod system, people were quite willing to pay 99 cents a song for a simpler, more elegant solution to getting the job done they needed to have done. So I bet you that a mechanism that frees us there are two things that will have to happen that will free us from the state boundaries. One of them is what Governor Bush has talked about a lot. That is the importance of setting standards so that we can innovate to a standard. We don't set standards in the process by which we achieve it. We just set a standard for the result. And then we free the market up so that people will be quite willing to pay for themselves to get what they need, the best solution to get to the standard. And then the bondage of funding from one district to another kind of gets erased little by little.
Now, Clay, one issue that seems to come up here is when we talk about school choice, historically we've talked about the choice between school A and school B. So much of what the three of you have talked about today is actually hybridization, which isn't just, it's a question of enrolling your child here or there, it's a question of customizing a bundle of services. Does this suggest that we actually need to think differently about freeing up expenditures and how states fund schooling for this to really reach fruition?
Absolutely right. The school itself is simply an artifact of technology that existed, as you said, in the 1920s. And so then we tend to frame our mission in terms of the structure that we're working in. And if we can free ourselves from that, then all kinds of opportunities and all kinds of barriers appear and are eliminated.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Yes, I don't understand how superintendents and other people can say online turning is not proven or we're not going to produce a quality service. The United States military has been online for over 20 years. And I've served in the military. I've been in Panama and Saudi Arabia, had online learning for stuff there, and then I would give them the test, and I knew the answer and results within 30 to 45 seconds, and then I adjust my learning model to make corrections right then and there. It's proven. It's been working for over 20 years in the United States military.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
so we have time for last thoughts, guys.
Well, I just want to respond to that because I think it's a really important analogy. Public education has not invested heavily in technology for the political reasons that we all discussed. So, in fact, if you look at a lot of technology in education today, some of it's not particularly good. That will change when the demand begins to increase. And to see what it can look like, the Army is actually a great example. I had a chance to see this, and the most sophisticated jobs, the jobs on which lives utterly depend, instruction on those topics is provided through very sophisticated online instruction, the kind of instruction that kids would hugely benefit from if applied to their ordinary academic subjects. This is about, in many ways, it's about supply and demand. If the public education system were open to it, the technology is there to deliver it.
Bill?
I would use the military for another analogy, too, especially since Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is near us, to the extent that Dad gets a temporary assignment outside of the States or gets sent somewhere else and the parents need to relocate for a short term, with this technology, you're going to be able to keep the kids in the same school they were at before with all their same friends. They'll be able to take their classes the same as they would as if they were sitting there, even though they're not going to be physically located there for a period of time. And it's less disruptive to the family. Once again, as Clay would say, you're modeling the system more towards the users than the delivery system that had been in place. So I think this kind of thing is very beneficial to men and women in the military, and people have to relocate periodically.
Clay, and I think it's fitting that you have the last word.
Let me just close by thanking you again for giving all of your talent and your energy and your money to this cause. It really is inspiring to see the selflessness in your faces, and I'm very grateful for what you're doing.
Thank you so much.